Okay, we previously looked at how to find slope 3 different ways, from a graph, from a table, and from 2 points. Today, we're continuing on with our study of slope-intercept form. So as I just said, we learned how to find the slope. Now we need to know how to find the intercept. And what do we mean by that? So in order to write an equation in slope-intercept form, the slope and the intercept must be known. Now, when we talk about intercept, think about interception. It's where two things cross over. And in this particular instance, we're talking about the y-intercept. So many lines can have two different intercepts, the x-intercept, where you cross the x-axis, and the y-intercept, where you cross the y-axis. And what we need for the slope-intercept form is the y-intercept. So those two things, slope and y-intercept, must be known in order to write this equation. So today we're going to focus on finding the y-intercept from a graph and how to write the equation now that we can find slope and y-intercept. So now that you know how to find the slope from a graph, we're going to locate the y-intercept and write the equation. The variable used for the y-intercept is always b. So if you remember, the variable we always use for slope is m, and the variable for y-intercept is b. So think about not so much the y, but intercept and slope, b and m. That would be how you can remember in alphabetical order. The y-intercept is equal to the value of the y-coordinate when the value of the x-coordinate is 0. On the graph, the y-intercept occurs where the graph of the line crosses or intersects the y-axis. So just looking at a graph, we have two axes. We have the x-axis and we have the y-axis. Alphabetically, x comes before y, and in the morning, you're always laying down before you stand up. So this particular axis that we're focused on is the y-axis. And the y-intercept coordinate point is where the line of the graph intersects or crosses over this y-axis. So we can see it's this point right here. And if you think about it, we just said up above that the value when you're on the y-axis is for x is always 0. And if you think about this, y is about moving side to side. And if you're on this axis that connects to the origin, that means you haven't moved at all side to side. There's been no movement side to side. So movement side to side, 0 units. And then the y-coordinate value is how many, what's the distance or the number of units away from 0 that your line is crossing. It could cross at 0, but first we determine this is below 0, so it's going to be a negative and 1, 2 units. So the location of this point is 0, -2. And we say the y-intercept then is -2. Okay, because it's understood that when you're talking about a y-intercept, that the value of x on this axis is 0. Okay, value on this axis for x is 0. You haven't moved side to side at all. So by saying y-intercept is -2, I know go to the y-axis, go down to -2, and that must be my point. So moving on to the second page of notes. So looking at the same graph, so down below we have the same graph. When we draw our slope triangle between 2 points, and I just chose these 2 points. It could be, remember, I can choose any 2 points on the line, and I should get the same ratio once I simplify. So to go from the second point to the left to the third point to the left, I went down 3, so that's a -3. and I went over 5. So looking at the same graph, when we draw our slope triangle, remember the triangle has to be a right triangle. Basically, I just think of riding your bike. You have to stay on the road. How are you going to get on the road without moving diagonally? We can see that the line of the rise is -3 and the run of 5. So for this line, our slope is -3 over 5, or -3/5. And our b, if you remember, we determined is -2. So the slope-intercept form, the equation is just y equals mx plus b. So m is going to represent slope, b is going to represent intercept. And remember, when two things sit next to each other, like the m and the x, they're multiplying. So this m, because it's going to be a number, it's the coefficient of x once you're in slope-intercept form. So to write the equation, we substitute the value of the slope where the variable m is, and the value for the y-intercept for the variable b. So just to reiterate the same graph, we determined that m is -3/5. Smaller, -3/5. And the b is, and I'll correct that, you can't see the negative on my 2 there, but -2. So the equation, I simply take out the m and the b and substitute in the values I know for them that exist. So -3/5 and the value for x is -2. So once I find the slope, -3/5, and the b, -2, I can now write the equation y equals -3/5 x plus -2. So this equation is an equal representation of this line or this graph with this line. Okay. So moving on, your assignment today on your GP17, it's giving you 3 graphs, 2 lines on each graph. Each line is its own independent problem. I want you to write the coordinate point and the y-intercept. So remember, the coordinate point should be in parentheses, and the y-intercept is just going to be the y-coordinate from this point, just like we found on our first example page of notes right here. This was the coordinate point, this was the y-intercept. On the second page, you're given 6 lines, and you need to find the slope, the intercept, and then write the equation. So that goes along with our second page of notes, where we found the m and the b, and then we wrote the equation. And that is it for today.